What's up guys, my name is Ace, and yesterday we did get quite a big update in preparation for Season 2 of Vanguard, and as expected with a big update, this also introduced a handful of issues or potential hidden changes here. I'm not too sure which of these are intentional and which of them are unintentional, but I just wanted to talk about several of these today because some of them are quite important. And let's start it off with one of the big ones. This is the first one that many people were noticing right away. This is an apparent nerf to the Gung-Ho proficiency. Now before this update, the Gung-Ho proficiency allows you to fire while sprinting, and on top of this, it literally eliminates your sprint out time. So while sprinting or even tack sprinting, if you pull a trigger with Gung-Ho, pre-patch, your gun would fire immediately as if you weren't sprinting at all. After this update, people were noticing it was no longer an instant sprint out time with Gung-Ho, but many people, myself included, were still suspecting that it was doing something to help with your sprint out time. Maybe it was still reducing it in some way. So I wanted to find out exactly what was going on here, and I went in, I tested this, and I looked at it frame by frame, and it turns out Gung-Ho no longer helps your sprint out time at all. Now, it does still allow you to fire while sprinting, but you have to complete that sprint out time before the gun will start going off. You'll continue to sprint, but there's still that delay between sprinting and firing your gun. And this is one of those changes where I honestly don't know if this was intentional or if this is an unintended bug. Part of me leans toward this being an intentional change because if you do look at the description for Gung-Ho, all it says is it allows you to fire while sprinting. It doesn't say anything about your sprint out or sprint to fire time. And in some previous Call of Duty games, Gung-Ho or its equivalent did just this. It only allowed you to fire while sprinting without having any impact on sprint out time. So part of me is thinking that it was actually a bug that our sprint out time was literally 0 milliseconds when we used Gung-Ho, and therefore this is actually fixing that unintended bug. But having said that though, I don't agree with this decision. I don't like this decision, and the primary reason behind this is Gung-Ho is almost always going to be on guns that are not really the top tier guns. I'm thinking guns like the Sten or the AS-44 or the Gracie Auto shotgun. All of these guns are considered to be weaker guns for their particular category. And Gung-Ho was one of those really nice bonuses for these guns that allowed it to at least stand out in one way compared to the more powerful guns overall. Now I will say, I think a 0 millisecond sprint out time is a little bit ridiculous, and I don't necessarily think that's ideal either. And therefore, if it were up to me, I'd love to see a happy middle ground. Maybe make it so Gung-Ho cuts your sprint out time in half. I think that would be the best place for Gung-Ho, so it's still helping significantly, and it still allows those weaker guns that have that Gung-Ho proficiency to stand out in that way, without making it too ridiculous like it was pre-patch where you could literally start firing in an instant. In either case, this change has been made, and you may want to adjust some of your class setups accordingly. For me, I really don't care too much about firing while sprinting. Really, the only reason I used Gung-Ho was for that elimination of sprint out time. And this also means I'm likely not going to be touching the Sten anytime soon, because like I said, that was one of the only things that made it sort of stand out from many of the other SMGs. So that's the first change that I noticed that went through with this patch that was never mentioned in the patch notes. Next up, just a little thing that I noticed is with the Cooper Carbine, they've now equalized it with the other guns in the game where it no longer has that really strong blur effect when you fire your gun. Now this is how all of the guns were initially in the beta build of the game, but then they fixed that for launch, and apparently that fix didn't apply to the Cooper because it was probably a work in progress at the time, but that has finally gone through, so there's no longer that crazy amount of blur every time you fire the Cooper. Next up, I've heard some people mention that they feel the spawns have been adjusted, and I streamed yesterday for about 2 hours and I put in the gameplay time and I was really looking for spawn changes. And I've got to say, at least after 2 hours just playing Domination, I didn't notice any massive changes across the board, but there may have actually been a few adjustments. I did notice a few spawns that I wasn't used to seeing, and therefore I think it's definitely plausible that there has been some spawn adjustment, but I wouldn't say they have fixed the spawns by any means. I think it's just slightly different on some of the maps. And just to clarify, I'm not even 100% sure of this. I just feel like I saw a few situations that worked differently from what I would normally expect. After that, there's an unfortunate change that a lot of hardcore players have noticed, and this is apparently they've eliminated the combat pacing options for hardcore game modes. So if you're a hardcore player, now you never know what you're gonna get when you search. You select your game mode still, but then you never know if you're gonna be playing tactical or blitz or assault. It's just gonna throw you into presumably whatever lobby happens to be available within the game type that you're searching for. And this one definitely sounds frustrating for the hardcore players out there. It's possible that this decision was made because the hardcore player base simply isn't high enough to support all of the different combat pacing options as well as the different mixes of game modes. And if I had to guess, that's likely the case, but that still sucks as a hardcore player. I can only imagine if they did that to core, I would be very, very frustrated because I simply don't like playing blitz. I'm totally happy playing tactical or assault, but generally speaking, I stay away from blitz because that's where many of the issues in the game are just largely exacerbated. But finally for this video, there's one last change that a lot of people have been noticing, and this one is extra frustrating, and I really hope this is an unintended change. In objective game modes, you can no longer see how many deaths you have on the scoreboard. And I'm not talking in the middle of the game. Previously, in the middle of the game, you couldn't see your deaths in objective game modes, and I think this is just to prevent people from feeling discouraged and maybe backing out of the game when they see how many deaths they have, and it's a lot of deaths. Or I guess to prevent harassment from people like yelling at their teammates for having so many deaths in game. Whatever their reasoning might be, this is something we've been going through for the past several years of Call of Duty where they eliminated the deaths from scoreboards in the middle of objective game modes. However, that's not the problem with this update. The problem with this update is even after the game, on the scoreboard, you can't see how many times you've died, or you can't see how many deaths everybody in the lobby got. And this has a lot of players very angry, reasonably so. Now, on the bright side, I do have a suspicion that this one is an unintentional bug, and I really hope this is the case. And my reasoning behind this is before this update, the scoreboard was actually missing from the post-match summary. And also, even in the MVP screen, oftentimes the scoreboard wouldn't even load, so you couldn't check your deaths anyway. And now that part is fixed, so you can see the scoreboard, but unfortunately, the scoreboard that you see is the same scoreboard that you'd be seeing throughout the middle of the match with no deaths included on it. So my suspicion is in fixing that issue where the scoreboard wasn't appearing at all after the match, they have unintentionally made it so we get that mid-game scoreboard instead of what we should be getting, which is the end-game scoreboard, which does show all of the deaths. Now, having said that, if this was actually an intentional decision, that is an absolutely terrible decision. When you're playing Call of Duty, you're playing a competitive online shooter where you're putting yourself up against other people and, generally speaking, trying to outperform those people. That's the nature of a competitive video game. And a stat like deaths is a very key stat in tracking that performance and seeing how well you did. And when you start eliminating extremely important stats from that entirely, so you can't even see how well you performed in the previous game, or how well you stack up against the other people that were playing in the game. For many people at least, that defeats the entire purpose of playing the game and caring about the game and wanting to improve at the game. If I wanted to play a video game and not care about my performance at all, I'd play single player games, I'd play offline, I'd play something totally different from this that isn't performance based. In an online competitive multiplayer environment, this is a performance-based game, and seeing your performance, and not just your own performance, but how you stack up against the other players that you were playing with and against, that's a key part of the puzzle. And like it or not, even in objective game modes, the death stat is an incredibly important stat when looking at a player's general performance in that match. At this rate, if this was intentional, I wouldn't be surprised if they start eliminating online play and everybody just gets to play against bots because performance is irrelevant and apparently they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And this is why I really hope this was an unintentional change. We're seeing a similar story with Battlefield right now where they don't even have a scoreboard for you to check out the lobby and your performance in that lobby, and there was massive pushback against that, and now they're going to be adding it sometime in the summer, it sounds like. So I hope the developers realize that this is completely backwards and this is going to be pushing a lot of people away if they don't get on top of this and fix this soon. I know for some people it's not a big deal, they don't really care, but just know there are a ton of people out there that really do care about this, and this is a very big deal to them. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for today's video on the hidden and possibly unintentional changes that were made with yesterday's updates. Of course, I want to hear from you guys in the comment section below. First up, are there any other things that you've noticed with this update that weren't mentioned in the patch notes that have changed? And second, what do you think about the changes that I outlined in today's video? Do you think these are good changes or bad changes? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.